his Nicomachean Ethics, the Greek philosopher Aristotle defines virtue as the mean between an excess and deficiency, and the pursuit thereof is the key to a well-lived life. In Catholicism, according to the Baltimore Catechism, virtue has a slightly narrower definition, namely, the habit of doing good and avoiding evil. In practical terms, that means acting and believing exactly as you are told by the institutional church. Virtue can often be treated as a means of currying favor with God, something we cultivate in order to bolster our chances at heaven. Although technically, salvation is not obtained through our own merits, but through faith, the belief that God sent his only Son to die for us, and works, the pursuit of good that theoretically is inspired by our aforementioned belief. But is that really the case? Is faith in the supernatural propositions of Catholicism the best motivation to be a virtuous person? In my experience, there can be severe disadvantages to the religious virtue framework. Particularly in traditional Catholicism, there is a heavy-handed emphasis on our unworthiness and how we receive mercy from God of which we are undeserving. We are taught to develop virtue as a way to avoid hell and appease a God who, according to many priests, seems to be as ruthlessly exacting as he is merciful. There's a problematic image of God that emerges from this understanding, wherein our relationship with the divine is transactional. The goal is to work through our spiritual debt, or more precisely, the temporal punishment due to our sin, through sacrifice and the cultivation of virtue. Even though Jesus technically paid the price for our redemption, the motivations for developing virtue in traditional Catholic theology still leaves one with a sense of purchasing heaven. And if we prioritize the hell avoidance approach to spirituality, we will pursue what priestly authorities define as virtue, despite evident harms that may result, such as the coldness and stress caused by excessive marital abstinence, the breakdown of the intellect and empathy that comes from unquestioning submission to rigid rules, or impoverished living conditions that may be worsened by immoderate detachment from material goods. Virtue merely becomes a ticket to heaven than something measurably good for the only lives we know with a kind of absolute certainty. But what if we set aside this traditional Catholic approach? Why ought we pursue virtue? I contend that the superior motivation to grow in virtue is the recognition of higher goods and the bonds of mutual respect we share with our fellow human beings. In this approach, the fruits of virtue are more readily apparent. Guided by Aristotle's definition of virtue as the mean between an excess and deficiency, we can pursue sexual pleasure in the context of a long-term relationship because we experience it as wonderful and orderly. But we can also be wary of the addictions of pornography, the dissolution of hookup culture, and on the opposite end, the frigidity of prudishness because of the clear negative impacts on our minds, bodies, and relationships. We can choose to be truthful because we observe how dishonesty breaks down communication in the long run. However, we can also take care to not be excessively blunt, as there are situations where candor may stir up more trouble than our silence on a given matter. In terms of the Catholic definition of doing good and avoiding evil, virtue can largely be based on empathy. We avoid slander because we understand the harms of a damaged reputation, and we can even take it upon ourselves to defend and enhance the reputations of those around us. We choose not to steal because we know what it is to lose our cherished belongings, and in fact we can go beyond that and share whatever extras we have with others. To live a life of virtue is undoubtedly difficult and demands the utmost self-mastery. Persevering on such a path is spiritually unsustainable if the primary motivation is fear of the afterlife or obligation to a dogmatic and not so easily pleased deity. We must be convinced of the beauty and the goodness on the other side of our labor. It's like a pianist who develops the discipline to endure hours of intensely focused but exhausting practice because he trusts that the result will be a beautiful piece of music. Or an athlete who who rises at 5 a.m. each day to work out at the gym because she is invigorated by the feeling of physical health and athletic accomplishment. There must be pleasure on the other side of that pain, and that joyous culmination that we can almost taste is what gives us strength to seek out the mean between an excess or deficiency, or to pursue the good and avoid evil. The search for goodness we can experience is what helps us discover what is right, and then we do what is right for its own sake. Human beings have always had innate moral intuitions that are largely shaped by relationships and experiences in this life. And it is these instincts that can help put us on the path to virtue. And though some of us lack the particular theological language or network of justifications to articulate exactly what is right, we will always have our conscience, which, in the words of John Henry Newman, is the aboriginal vicar of Christ.